G'day there, I'm David Krantz. In part 2 of this series, I'll be exploring consciousness in more depth than I covered in part 1, that I called The Mind of God and Me. My focus here is to reflect on the role of consciousness in creation. Mind of God is a term coined by researcher Dr. Amit Goswami as an alias for quantum consciousness, his field of expertise. The term has rich meaning. So let's see who he is, why the alias, and what he has to say. Amit Goswami is Professor Emeritus of Physics from the University of Oregon. He's a pioneer of a new science known as Science Within Consciousness. He's a faculty member of the Quantum University in Honolulu and a consultant in many arenas, including to the hit movie What the Bleep Do We Know? And its sequel, Down the Rabbit Hole. His publications describe his findings and their applications across a range of fields that you may want to refer back to later on. What follows is mostly drawn from his book, God is Not Dead. The science within consciousness is inclusive of materialist science, but differs markedly with its assumptions about the nature of consciousness. Here's the gist of the fundamental difference. Materialist science holds that matter is the ground of all being, and that elementary particles are the basic building blocks of all that is. These particles combine to form atoms, and in turn, atoms combine to form molecules, and then molecules combine to form cells that differentiate to form our body's organs, including our brain, which in turn creates consciousness to finalize the remarkable outcome. But there's a hitch. The brain is matter, and matter cannot create non-matter, like ideas, hopes, and fears that we experience consciously. The science within consciousness holds that consciousness is the ground of all being. Consciousness is not a product of the brain. It's not even an epiphenomenal byproduct of the brain, as materialists claim. Consciousness just is. It's the eternal, universal cosmic mind whose oneness knows all and creates all, purposefully. As such, it is the source of all that is. It underpins and enables progressions such as this by what is referred to as upward causation. And here's the big but. Consciousness does its thing by downward causation, a notion that is dismissed by materialist science, but one that's held by devotees in relationship with their God. Goswami has this to say, and I quote, "Quantum physics is showing us the way by giving us back downward causation and its agent, God, acting through the observer. In Newtonian physics, objects are determined things, like bodies. But in quantum physics, objects are possibilities from which consciousness chooses." We'll see more about that later. Goswami sees downward causation as one of the quantum signatures of the divine, and makes further claim about its agent, God. Here's his claim. The God for which I present scientific data is quite the same God as the God envisaged by mystics and the founders of all the world's great traditions. Then he adds this qualifying observation. Although the teachings of the great religions have become diluted into dualism in their popular renditions, such teaching sees God as up there, separate from us down here. The relationship is dualistic. Such gods can be represented like this. The core is divine, but the periphery is culturally coloured and its integrity tarnished by harsh theological debate. Goswami uses the term the mind of God interchangeably with consciousness. Its totality is divine. Its form is monistic. Its reality is a single entity. We are embraced in its oneness. As an aside, I compared God and the mind of God in more detail in part 1 of this series. I called it The Mind of God and Me. But for now, let's look at this quantum stuff from scratch and see how it unfolds. So what is quantum mechanics? Here's Goswami's opener. Quantum mechanics is a branch of quantum physics that was discovered to explain the nature and behaviour of matter and energy on the scale of atomic and subatomic particles, but now is believed to hold for all matter. Now, here's a tricky fundamental to come to grips with. All matter exhibits the properties of both particles and waves. As early as the late 1600s, Isaac Newton thought that light was a string of corpuscles, in other words, particles. At about the same time, a Dutch physicist, Christian Huygens, described light as wave. The weird quantum finding is that both are right. Some of the time. A single photon, that's the smallest indivisible particle of light, will behave differently depending on whether it's being observed or not. It behaves as a particle when being observed and as a wave when it's not. It's a bit like this. No, that's not a dog with a wet nose. It's a photon being observed in a laboratory. It's a particle in a specific place. It stays put until the observation ceases, whereupon its wave aspect emerges and expands and continues to expand and dance in random locations until a further observation is made, whereupon the wave collapses, so-called, into a photon at the spot where the wave stopped dancing. Again, it stays put until the observation ceases, whereupon its wave aspect emerges, expands, and continues to expand and dance off again, only to collapse in particle form when observed. And so on. That's what quantum objects do. In the laboratory, the wave aspect or the particle aspect can be studied separately but not together. Their relationship is not dualistic. Photons and electrons are neither wave nor particle exclusively. Their true nature transcends both descriptions. Their relationship is complementary. They can be referred to as wavicles. As waves, all quantum objects are transcendent waves of possibility. As particles, they are immanent events of actuality. Waves of possibility collapse into actual particles when observed. So, if the laboratory findings at the micro level hold for all matter as claimed, how come that macro stuff, like furniture for instance, doesn't vanish and reappear between observations? Take this chair, for instance. The short answer is that an observer does influence it. The chair is clearly in a given spot when observed. And if the observer stops looking for a while, it doesn't vanish like the proton does, but the conglomeration of micro components that make up the macro body of the chair will lapse into waveform while standing in place. Now the waves of possibility of massive objects expand very sluggishly. My wobbles create quite the wrong impression. It's so sluggish that whenever the observer has another peek, all seems as was. But not so. In just the blink of an eye, a whiz-bang laser measuring device can detect a 1/1,000,000 trillionth of a centimetre movement of the chair. So let's give thanks for sluggish. The apparent stability of the material world camouflages its quantum nature, but also creates a sense of constancy that enables us to build a consensus reality. It's a nice arrangement. But for now, let's move back to basics. Consciousness can be conceptualized as containing two different domains. We live in the domain of immanent reality. We are surrounded by things, places, and clocks, all in the here and now, in so-called space-time. The second is the domain of transcendent reality. It's everywhere and everywhen. It's said to be outside space-time. This domain houses an infinity of possibilities that dance about in wave form to the choreography of quantum maths in the metaphoric ballroom that quantum pioneer Werner Heisenberg dubbed potentia. The waves keep dancing until they're observed by conscious intent, whereupon they actualize as their particular thing, just like the photon did a couple of slides ago. This means that every actual thing that is here in immanent reality, including us, was once just a wave of possibility here in transcendent reality. We and all our possessions, our thoughts, ideas and inspirations have become events of actuality, so-called, in the here and now. In short, non-material possibilities, as waves, collapse, so-called, to manifest as actual things when intentionally observed by consciousness. And note this, that includes our consciousness in circumstances yet to be discussed. Now, it might sound like stuff travels from here to here, but not so. Nothing actually leaves transcendence to arrive in immanence. Transcendent waves of possibility that dance continuously, when observed, are said to collapse discontinuously. That's all a bit spooky. We can't yet explain how, but it is clearly so. So let's see what this discontinuous collapse is all about. Let's compare how an electron gets from A to B in both classical and quantum physics. The classical shift is very familiar. It travels from A through space on a continuous path until it arrives at B. It's a different story in the quantum world. Watch this. You couldn't see it travel, could you? That's because it didn't. This is what happens. It disappears from A and appears at a random location B faster than the speed of light. The fact is that it did not travel through this intervening space. Let's watch that again. There you go. It disappeared, it didn't travel, it reappeared elsewhere. This apparently spontaneous shift has no continuous pathway. It is discontinuous. It's a quantum leap. And there's more. A quantum leap is not only discontinuous, it appears non-locally as well. So what's that all about? It's all about energy. In the classical version, we know that energy is used to move stuff along a local path. The harder we shove, the further things go. The closer we live to a TV tower, the better our reception. Energy and locality count. This is not the case with quantum locality. Non-locality is defined as the transfer of information or influence at a distance, without a path, without a signal. No energy is required or expended here. Well, we now have the elements of the tantalizing threesome discontinuous non-local collapse. One might well ask, what's all that got to do with the price of eggs? The emerging answer is everything. In the way we experience life, the way we sense it, the way we think about it, the way we feel about it, the meaning we ascribe to it, the way we manage the insights and intuitions that come to us, and indeed from our conscience that monitors and sometimes bothers us. All are sourced from consciousness. We've seen that the all-knowing, boundless universal mind houses the immanent domain where all physical matter, including us, brains and all, are held in space-time. Brain is the link whereby we interact with consciousness to experience things and events. Then there's the transcendent domain that houses the infinity of waves of possibility that dance about in potentia. These potential possibilities can be conceptually classified into four functional groups: the so-called supramental, mental, vital, and physical. Possibilities from these groupings all manifest in our experience by discontinuous non-local collapse of the particular possibilities that consciousness observes. That's downward causation. That's a signature of the divine. So what are these groupings all about? Let's look at the physical possibilities group first. It's this conceptual bin that houses all the possibilities that manifest as physical matter in the immanent domain, all thanks to discontinuous non-local collapse. We're in there as well, with all the other physical stuff that's not us. We sense our difference through touch, sight, hearing, taste and smell. We are the subjects that give meaning to those objects through our consciousness that is nested within the universal consciousness that permeates all creation. The all creation bit might seem a bit far-fetched, but philosopher Jim Holt argues that even rocks have a degree of innate consciousness. In an article entitled Mind of a Rock, Holt comments, and I quote, that if you are poetically inclined, you might think of the rock as a purely contemplative being. Suggests that we should be a bit gentle when next we rake our gravel. Now, all the physical matters that we sense that is not us is referred to as the gross outer material world. To move on, the non-physical possibilities shown yellow do not collapse directly into the immanent domain. They each collapse into an associated body that remains in transcendence. So the supramental intellect possibilities manifest into the supramental intellect body, mental possibilities into the mental body, and vital energy possibilities into the vital energy body. So what's each group about? The supramental body is a bit like a library of all universal archetypical wisdoms. Its content is sourced from love and grounded in truth that underpins justice and reflects beauty, goodness, wholeness, and abundance. It's from this source that we intuit. We gain new insights. We experience fresh inspiration and increased wisdom. Furthermore, it's against these archetypes that we get to choose the quality and intensity from the particular archetype that is the most helpful in adapting to any given circumstance. The mental body houses all possible thoughts that we may think, and thereby ascribe meaning to events in our lives. It's from here that thoughts spring to mind non-locally. The vital energy body houses a kind of blueprint of our biological makeup, a template, so to speak, of our body's form, its functioning, and its maintenance requirements. It monitors life's ups and downs and notes the variations in our overall vitality. Its purpose is that we may feel, experience emotions. We'll see how later. Furthermore, these bodies interact collaboratively within the transcendent domain. Their combination makes up our so-called inner psyche. That is, the subtle, non-material, internal experience that we have of the gross outer material world, the stuff that's not us. Now, the inner subjective world and the outer objective world are not separate worlds. They influence each other by interacting in parallel. Our thoughts, feelings, and physical sensing of life's events are experienced together. It's a bit like looking at old snapshots to refresh our experience of past holidays. Each photo is a physical image that triggers a thought, that recalls what we felt at the time, the stuff that captured our intuitive response to the setting, like the beauty of the scenery, or the love of the people in it, or some aspect of any other archetype. All is one event. Now, it might be a bit corny, but somehow I imagine these four bodies to be a nifty team of software writers whose programs run on the hardware of our brain matter. In other words, consciousness intentionally mediates between our inner psyche and our experience of the gross outer world. My metaphoric software projects so-called representations of the subtle inner onto the gross outer hardware of our brains, where they are known as stimulus possibilities. They are in our consciousness, but not yet in our awareness. Stimulus possibilities have yet to collapse into our conscious awareness. We'll see how later. Now, all that sounds like a long haul when described serially, but it all happens instantaneously. So let's review these ideas to date before moving on. Here's the office of my metaphoric software team, the supramental, mental, vital and physical bodies. The team consult and work together in parallel. All software programs leave their office with absolute guarantees that they are customized to run on a range of hardware devices whose operating systems have different capabilities. Ultimately, each of us does our own computing. Now, consciousness is an all-knowing two-way street. All that we are, think, feel, and do here in the immanent domain registers in transcendence. We are permanently linked, non-locally. The team not only monitors and knows us, it writes personalized software to service us. So, as an example, let's overview what happens when we have a tiff. Here, as physical beings, we sense stuff. We hear a criticism, see a glare, maybe smell a rat, or maybe even end up with a bad taste in our mouth, so to speak. Then we think what those cues might mean or imply, and we feel a negative emotion that fits the meaning. Hurt, rejected, angry, or whatever. The meaning that we ascribe is coloured by the historical conditioning that has shaped the way we see life. The team knows it and is well aware of the gaps in our repertoire of how we manage tiffs. So they pool their observations with a view to drafting a software package that will help us manage tiffs more effectively. This is where the supramental shines. Its wisdom holds possibilities that will not only work for us, but are graded at levels that are manageable for each of us to resolve TIFs our way. So the team cogitates and identifies a specific strategy that, if acted upon, would help us manage better resolve differences, and restore our sense of personal vitality. In a flash, the strategy is written into software. We get to know about the strategy intuitively. By that I mean as a new insight, as a gift from our inner tutor, consciousness. The gifting involves the representations and stimulus possibilities that I mentioned earlier. It's time to see what they do. This red dot symbolizes the team's encoded specific insight. It is subtle, non-material, inner psyche stuff. It's mind stuff that ends up in the immanent domain in the brain matter, so that we can eventually experience the insight. Now, since matter cannot independently process non-material mind, consciousness acts as a mediator, which, by discontinuous non-local means, projects a so-called representation of the long-awaited insight onto our brain. Note that the original possibility remains in mind. Remember, the representation doesn't travel from A to B, it simply appears. Also note that the representation of the original is referred to as a stimulus possibility. Even now, it's still only a stimulus possibility that is yet to be collapsed into experience. We still remain totally unaware of its presence, but we are nearly there. So where are we? We've got a stimulus possibility that arose non-locally onto the brain matter as a representation of my software team's TIF management program. The stimulus possibility stays put. We don't know it's there. It needs stimulation to enter our awareness. The original program remains in potentia as a possibility. Both possibilities are in consciousness, whose job it is to mediate between its domains, between mind and matter. But it's not yet happening, nor will it, for as long as our ego is in the driver's seat. Ego masks our awareness that we are always in consciousness. We need to shed the mask and claim our heritage as dwellers in unitive consciousness. That is, by being in brain-mind awareness. This is a state where our minds are consciously aware of being in resonant harmony with the universal mind of consciousness. There are several ways to enable this. All enter through the door of stillness, like meditation, prayerful intention, by receptive stillness that comes by fading ego-generated preoccupations, or by yoga, or therapeutic hallucinogens. My preferred way is to get into the mind of God. If you're interested, I've listed the skill steps for this approach in a YouTube called Not the God I Grew Up With. Now, brain-mind link blossoms when our chosen approach succeeds in aligning our mind with universal mind. Things then happen instantaneously that I can only describe sequentially. So, let's say, firstly, that we get a mind's eye view of the stimulus possibility. It might seem to us that the idea just sort of came to mind, out of the blue, so to speak. But just seeing the possibility is the observation that collapses both the stimulus possibility and the team's program possibility together. The team's effort stays put, and the stimulus possibility manifests as an actual experience. We gain an insight into a better way of managing TIFs. The insights are loving offerings. We are free to adopt, reject, or cogitate upon the option without coercion or judgment. If adopted, our TIFs get dealt with. Negativity gives way to positivity. Vitality is restored, and vital blueprints are reconditioned. While the process is mystical, the intent seems clear. The creative source invites our collaboration in its evolutionary progress. Furthermore, for me, there's an optimism that suggests that for each and every conceivable problem, there is already a possible solution in potentia, which in the oneness of brain-mind can manifest to our advantage or for our comfort. That's good news. Now let's meet Flo. Sadly, as a child, Flo witnessed lots of arguments between her parents, including physical violence. Her dad drank too much and was a philanderer. It was a very unhappy home. Then she married Joe Blow 5 years ago. He's a reliable bloke who's nothing like her philandering father. They both enjoyed their stable, comfortable domestic routine. Her childhood memories were safely tucked away in history. Then, one day, Joe came home late from work, looking a bit sheepish, very like her dad had looked just before a dust-up. Childhood memories were painfully stirred. She was afraid. Rightly or wrongly, her senses saw guilt on a philanderer's face. The little bit that she'd intuitively picked up from the supramental wisdom about managing domestic relationships flew out the window. She froze and thought the worst. For her, it meant that she was in the same boat that her mum had been in. Her negative meaning registered in the mental body. That thought was recognized by the vital body, and its negativity weakened the associated vital blueprint, whereupon Flo's physical vitality slumped, a consequence of inevitable discontinuous non-locality. Recall that the blueprint is a kind of energy map of our body's form, functions, and maintenance. Now, each organ in the map has a corresponding representation in our bodies. Each organ is the representation. Changes here in transcendence are perpetually mirrored here in the body. So any movement here is the motion that projects non-locally as emotion onto the related organ. At this point, we might anticipate that flow would then feel the emotion. But not so. According to Goswami, the emotions arising in whatever organ have a feeling component that settles in a zone outside of the particular organ, but adjacent to it. And would you believe it? Flow still doesn't feel it. These elusive energy zones are called chakras. This simple chart shows the names of the chakras, their locations, associated organs, and correlated emotions. I intend to focus on the bits that relate to flow rather than chakras in general. In flow's case, it's most likely that the quantum collapse occurred at the solar plexus chakra. Now, the organs representing the vital body in this chakra are the pancreas and abdominals. Recall that it's the motion of the waning vital body energy that stirs up the emotion in these organs. Think about it. The abdomen churns because flow's meaning is hard to stomach. She's had a fair old kick in the guts, as they say. The pancreas reacts as well. The sweetness has gone out of flow's world. These emotions impact heavily on flow's very identity. Her strength flags. Her self-esteem is shot. Remember Goswami's distinction. Emotions are triggered in organs, but feelings are an external component that are experienced in the mind. So for flow, words like shattered or sick in the stomach might come to mind. It all happens by a complex psycho-neuro-immunological connection that is triggered by a small endocrine gland that is linked to a nearby chakra. Simply put, the endocrine glands communicate with the brain where the mind is mapped. It was in mind that Flo thought the word shattered for the impact of the emotional shift in her abdominals and pancreas. Such thoughts downgrade immunological effectiveness in the vital blueprint. Ponder this. If anyone, Flo included, bottles up negative thoughts linked to any chakra without resolution, they will be less able to ward off bugs, bacterial or viral infections, or indeed any object that the body experiences as not me, cysts and the like, all because of the reduced effectiveness of their immune system. Of course, the reverse is also true. Joyful living promotes health. There is much more to it than that, as I discovered in Goswami's book, The Quantum Doctor, particularly the chapter entitled Mind as Slayer. We left poor old Flo up in the air with horrid thoughts, feeling sick to the core. But dear old Joe notices that she's having a downer. They chat, and Joe explains that he went looking for a lovely place to celebrate their wooden wedding anniversary. His explanation rings true to the software team. Flo senses the significance of what she hears, and her intuitive trust in Joe is restored. Her thoughts soar positively. The psycho-neuro-immunological bit has kicked in. Her positive meaning has registered in the mental body, which influences the vital body. The blueprint firms up, and her vitality blossoms. She feels great. Relief. Give ways to gratitude that flows through to delight. On the day, Flo had her hair tinted and wore her brightest outfit. It was a great night. The ups and downs of Flo's history highlight these propositions. Firstly, our conditioned histories influence our perceptions, and our perceptions shape the meanings that we ascribe to events. Negative perceptions decrease vitality, whereas positive perceptions increase vitality. Swings in vitality alter the dynamism of the vital body blueprint. Variations in the blueprint influence the functioning of an associated organ. To keep it simple, we can say that the level of effectiveness of organ function is experienced as an emotion. In Flo's example, her negativity was relatively shortly lived, but it's clear that bottled up negative emotions diminish organ function, which if prolonged, lead to related organ sickness. It follows that there are serious implications when histories are chronically traumatized. The encouraging fact is that prolonged positive emotions enhance organ function. Now, it also seems a bit timely to summarise my understanding of the process that led to these observations. Flo's story was all about the meaning in her mind interacting with the matter of her body. In the 1650s, René Descartes was the first to point out that mind and body are different entities in terms of substance, nature, and meaning. The relationship between the two has been debated ever since. Some highlights. In 1802, the materialist Pierre Cabanis put the view that the brain produced thoughts in the same way that liver produced bile. Then in 1890, Shadworth Hodgson argued that feelings in the mind do not and cannot affect the brain matter of the nervous system. He further claimed that mental states are present only as epiphenomena, that is, as a secondary byproduct of the brain. Many material reductionist scientists still hold those ideas and reject the finding that mind and matter are both quantum possibilities for consciousness to choose from. When consciousness observes the one it wants, it collapses that possibility into a thing. If it's a mind thing, it gives us meaning and the experience of thinking. If it's a matter thing, it gives us the sensations of seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, and tasting. Furthermore, consciousness mediates the mind-body interaction and somehow makes space for either mind-body healing or mind-body disease to occur. These outcomes are respectively dubbed the placebo effect, when positive beliefs help us get better, or the nocebo effect, when negative beliefs diminish the pace or even the probability sometimes of our getting well. Both effects are familiar to many health providers without them necessarily accepting the quantum explanation of the process. So let's move on for now, and we'll look at the stages of creativity that lead to effective problem solving. So meet Wally. He's a frustrated chap who's struggling with an unresolved issue. He needs a solution. To be fair, Wally's done his homework. He's read widely around the issue. He's consulted experts, surfed the net, done all he could. This meets the requirement of stage 1 of the creative process, preparation. But he's still stuck. The issue still lurks in the back of Wally's mind. He has yet to learn that his mind is not only linked to universal mind, but nested in it. That's where my metaphoric software team have their office. To help understand the complexity and immediacy of the interactions that follow, I've created a fictional office manager called Conchi to escort us through the next 3 stages slowly. She starts in the What People Don't Yet Know section of the Cosmic Library. From there, she sees what Wally needs to know and makes a note of it. The need registers in the mental body, whereupon the team thumbs through catalogues, so to speak, cogitates and selects a range of possibilities, any of which could solve Wally's problem. The list gets written into metaphoric software, and Conchi files a copy in the Transcendent Library. Thanks to discontinuous non-locality, the list of options is spontaneously represented in Wally's brain as a stimulus possibility. But Wally's attention is still on his problem. His ego is in what can I do mode. His preoccupation masks his awareness of the work already done by consciousness on his behalf. This ignorance puts him in stage 2 of the creative process, unconscious processing. Consciousness has laid the egg, so to speak, but Wally hasn't got a clue that he's the incubator. The solution has yet to hatch. The stimulus possibility is there for the seeing, but nothing has changed. Wally's still trying to figure out a solution. Conchi would love to help. She's fully aware that Wally's best option is listed within the range of possible solutions. But she can't let on what she knows. She's gagged. Her CEO, the mind of God, forbids staff to lead or prompt. His strict freedom of choice policy makes it clear. It's Wally's problem. It's his call. He gets to choose from the list. It's a choice he'd love to make, if only he could see the options, but he can't. It's a stalemate. For Conchi, it's a no-no, and for him, it's a don't know. This circularity, I would if I could, but I can't, and so would I if I could, is endless. Such circularity is referred to as a tangled hierarchy. Wally will get his solution by untangling the tangle. So let's leave these two to go round in circles for a bit so that we can get the hang of tangled hierarchies. So what do we notice in this picture? At first glance, we see a right hand drawing a left hand drawing a right hand. The picture goes round in circles forever. We're stuck in an infinitely oscillating system. Now let's colour code each hand. Red for the right hand and blue for the left. And now for a bit of grammar. The right hand, the subject of the sentence, draws the left hand, the object, and in turn the left hand as subject draws the right hand as object. Now the words say that each hand draws the other hand, but the colours help us see that each hand is entangled with itself in a bit of a scruffy mishmash. The right hand is both the subject and the object, and so too is the left. This apparency conjures up an image something like this: a so-called tangled hierarchy. Now, to untangle the hierarchy, we have to step outside the system in order to see the unified whole. In our example, this image is the whole. The unified whole is a single object drawn by a single subject, the Dutch artist Maurits Escher. Once we get the gist of this, it becomes clearer that Wally can step outside the system by intentionally entering into the oneness of brain-mind, the unified oneness, where Wally's mind is consciously in harmony with universal mind. Thereafter, it's job done. Let's track it. We left Conchi and Wally like this. One way for Wally to step out of the system is to declare an intention to himself to enter the mind of God. In that state, the tangled hierarchy collapses, and Wally sees the unified whole. His hitherto dormant link to universal mind wakes up and blossoms into full resonance of brain-mind connection. His intention acted as a reminder. Both possibilities collapse simultaneously. This one stays in potentia and will continue to dance as a wave. The stimulus possibility will collapse to manifest as a range of possible solutions. Wally can now see a few things in his mind's eye that could possibly work. He surveys the list, considers the alternatives, and chooses the option that would work best for him. This is an aha moment, a quantum leap. Eureka, he cries. I can now move on from here. The problem can now become a work in progress. This welcome insight rounds out stage 3 of the creative process, creative insight. The choosing is effortless. The option is simply recognized. Let's have a play to experience the simple act of recognizing our choice. There are 2 images here entangled within the one: 2 faces and an urn. Goswami makes this comment, and I quote, "Notice that you are not affecting the picture when you shift from one perception to another. Both possibilities are already within you. You are just making a choice between them by choosing your perspective." Unquote. I hope you could see both images, and I hope that this insight helps. Now, back to Wally. He's had his aha moments. He's delighted with his solution. Notice that Wally is no longer in brain-mind. He's still conscious, of course, but his awareness is now focused on how to make it all happen, figuring out the steps he needs to translate his solution into a tangible product. Wally is on his way. He's now in the final stage 4 of the creative process, manifestation. So let's wish him well and leave him to it. This 4-stage creative process is the engine that propels humanity's evolutionary train. We've progressed to our current stage of development because of the myriad aha moments that punctuate our history. An advanced version of this process skips the 2 middle steps when our knowing is intuitive. Intuitions are insights that are already known instinctively, without any need for preliminary processing. Intuitions are sourced here to be expressed here, always with beneficial outcomes. Such intuitions seem to vary in proportion to our level of our consciousness of consciousness, as depicted in David Hawkins' map of consciousness that I overviewed at this reference some time ago. Now it's clear that intuitive knowing pervades the universe. Seeds know what to grow into. Blackbirds know how to make a perfectly hemispherical nest, first time round, and so on. Consider the fully intuitive behaviour of birds, for instance. Their intuitive knowing is called cosmognosis, literally knowing from the cosmos. The Shorter Oxford defines it as the instinct that teaches animals the right time for migration and the fitting place to which to go. This flock is no doubt migrating in this formation to conserve energy. Leadership rotates, and positions shuffle intuitively as leaders drop back to rest in the slipstream of others. Their know-how is no doubt sourced from their species' supramental archetype. Now, it seems to me that without coercion, the future is beckoning humanity to embrace the know-how that is cosmognostically discerned. Such know-how cherishes the oneness of fluxing with fluidity, utility, and fidelity in kinship with all nature. In his documentary film The Quantum Activist, Goswami introduces the catchphrase "Doobie Doobie" to highlight the need for an ongoing balance between who we are as contemplative beings and what we do in the activities that we pursue and in the way we interact with and contribute to others. Sounds a bit weird, but the catchphrase "Doobie Doobie" hooks a boyhood memory from the 1930s, when I imagined that I could tell the mood of a steam train by the way it puffed. The playful child in me now is entertained by the image of a locomotive towing our evolutionary train towards its ultimate perfection. When life feels like an uphill ride, it's doobie doobie, doobie doobie, doobie doobie. And on a good day, it's doobie 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 doobie, and so on. In our contemplative state of being, we can reflect on the collective evolutionary progress to date, and maybe envisage a world whose population intends that in our being, our doing will intuitively do what love would then do next in any given context. Seeing such a possibility is the precondition of its manifestation. There is plenty yet to do. This is by no means the end. It's just another whistle stop. So thank you for sharing my journey thus far. May we travel well and choose to follow the beckoning. Seek to live cosmognostically, and as best we can, intend to do what love would do next. Bye for now.